Hey guys, tonight we are standing in the middle of the Egyptian desert, sand crunching under your feet as if the entire ground is a giant hourglass ticking away grains of history. The air is warm even though the sun has long dipped beneath the horizon, and above you hangs a swollen moon, silver and unblinking, casting its glow on something that refuses to be ignored. The Great Pyramids. Their edges slice into the night sky like blades that time has failed to dull. You shift your shoulders, feeling the desert wind brushing past, and you realize these things were old before Rome was a rumor. Before even the word history had a proper definition. And here you are, staring at them, wondering who in the world really built these colossal structures. Spoiler, you probably won't survive trying to stack that many stone blocks yourself. Not even with all the protein shakes in your kitchen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a quick comment with your location and the local time, because I love seeing how far across the planet this little nighttime caravan stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the sand, trying to imagine what this place looked like before the tourist buses, the souvenir stalls, and the selfie sticks. Strip it all away, and what you have left is this endless expanse of stone and silence. The pyramids rise like mountains made not by nature but by hands, human or maybe something else. Depending on which camp you listen to, their angles are so sharp you could almost cut your fingertip tracing the line of moonlight running down each edge. And in that glow, it doesn't feel like you're looking at ruins. It feels like they're still alive, still guarding a secret they refuse to tell. And historians still argue whether these monuments were just massive tombs or whether they had cosmic functions that modern minds barely grasp. That's part of the thrill. You're walking into one of history's biggest debates. But there's something more haunting than the academic arguments. The sheer physical presence of these structures. They don't just sit there, they loom. You can feel their weight in your chest. The Great Pyramid alone weighs about 6 million tons, block after block stacked higher than a 40-story building, all without the cranes, forklifts, or coffee-fueled construction crews you'd expect today. You trudge closer, sand sticking to your ankles, and press your palm against one of the blocks. The limestone feels cool, smooth in some places, rough in others where centuries of desert storms have gnawed at it. Think about it, each of these blocks could weigh as much as 2 or 3 cars, yet they were somehow dragged, lifted, and set with a precision that rivals laser-cut stone. You almost expect to hear a faint hum under your hand, like the stones are vibrating with the memory of how they got here. The mainstream story tells you that armies of workers, tens of thousands, spent decades hauling these blocks across the desert, using sledges, ramps, and plain old sweat. But then you look at the geometry. The Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, just a hair's breadth off from true north. That kind of accuracy is something even modern builders would brag about. And they had GPS, so was it really just brute force and rope, or was there some hidden knowledge lost to time? A quirky tidbit. Ancient Greek travelers once claimed the pyramids were older than Egypt itself, that they had been here before the Nile even ran its course. Imagine arriving in Egypt in the 5th century BCE, looking at these structures, and saying, yeah, no way our grandparents did this. You can laugh at their exaggeration, but a small part of you wonders if they were onto something. You tilt your head back and squint at the tip of the Great Pyramid, or where the tip would have been if the smooth casing stones hadn't eroded or been stripped for later construction. At one point, that surface would have gleamed white in the sun, polished limestone shining so bright you'd need to shade your eyes. Some legends say the capstone might have been covered in gold, catching the sunrise like a spark from the gods themselves. If true, just imagine the desert lit up each morning like a cosmic light bulb. And Historians still argue whether that golden cap ever existed. But in the hush of night, you kind of want to believe it did. You shuffle a few steps and notice how quiet the desert is. No crickets, no rustle of leaves, just the soft rasp of sand moving with the wind. That silence makes every story about the pyramids echo louder in your head. Some people say aliens built them, dropping down in shimmering ships and leaving blueprints before zooming off to another galaxy. You chuckle softly, sure. It makes for good History Channel special. But if aliens had gone through all the trouble, why no gift shop receipts? Still, there's something tantalizing about standing here, staring at the sheer impossibility of it all. Even if you reject the alien idea, you have to admit it's kind of wild to imagine farmers and stonemasons just waking up one morning and saying, "All right, boys, let's build the biggest thing the planet's ever seen. Should only take us a few decades." As you walk along the base, the moonlight plays tricks on your eyes. The blocks seem endless, like you're shrinking beside them. The smooth line of the pyramid edge runs up into the sky, vanishing into the glow of the stars. And you remember, these stars are the same ones the builders stared at. When they paused at night, sweaty and exhausted, they would have looked up at this exact sky. Maybe they too wondered whether the pyramids would outlive their names. Their dynasties, even their gods. Spoiler, they did, and here you are. Their quiet audience? You drag your fingers over another block. Let the grit cling to your skin, and you feel like you've touched both the past and a riddle that refuses to end. These pyramids aren't ruins. They're questions. Every grain of sand around them whispers, "Who built us? And why?" You lean against the stone, breathing in the dry desert air, and in your mind you step backward into time, all the way into the glittering halls of the royal palace. You can almost hear the shuffle of sandals over polished stone floors, the low hum of servants carrying trays of dates and wine, and above it all, the voice of a pharaoh. His words ripple through the room, commanding, rehearsed, almost musical. When you picture a king of ancient Egypt, you might imagine some gaudy crown and eyeliner thicker than your favorite rock stars. But beyond the costumes and ceremonial gestures, what drove these rulers wasn't just politics, it was obsession. An obsession with eternity. With their names being whispered thousands of years later, you realize you're participating in their dream right now. Just by standing under the moonlight and muttering, "Wow." Mainstream history reminds you that pyramids were built during Egypt's Old Kingdom, particularly the 4th dynasty, Sneferin. The pharaoh with a flair for trial and error experimented with pyramid designs until he nailed the geometry that culminated in the Great Pyramid of his son, Khufu. It wasn't just a building project, it was a cosmic audition. A performance meant to convince the gods that these kings deserved immortality. And you have to admit, if the afterlife were judged on architectural flex alone, Khufu passed the exam with flying colors. You close your eyes and imagine the scene. The pharaoh seated on a gilded throne, surrounded by advisors, priests, and maybe one guy nervously whispering about how much this whole thing is going to cost. Bread, beer, copper tools, limestone quarries, it all adds up. The pharaoh doesn't care. He wants something colossal, something no one can ever outdo. You kind of recognize that vibe. It's the same energy as someone building a swimming pool just because their neighbor has a hot tub. But here's the kicker. Historians still argue whether the pyramids were ever meant to be simple tombs at all. Yes, sarcophagi have been found in some, but no royal mummy has ever been discovered inside the Great Pyramid itself. That absence sparks a wave of speculation. Were the pyramids really vaults for bodies? Or were they something else entirely? Power plants for spiritual energy, giant symbols aligning human ambition with cosmic order. The debate rages on, like a never-ending academic soap opera. Meanwhile, you can't help but laugh at some of the fringe claims. There are folks who say the pharaohs didn't even order the pyramids. that they were just convenient landlords who discovered them already standing and slapped their names on the walls. Imagine moving into a fully furnished house and telling your neighbors, "Yep, I built this myself." Ignore the alien logos on the foundation. It's absurd but oddly satisfying to picture Khufu as the ultimate ancient real estate opportunist. Still, there's no denying the divine fuel behind these constructions. The Egyptians believed their rulers were gods in human form, beings who straddled the line between mortal dust and eternal stars. So when a pharaoh dreamed of his pyramid, it wasn't just about ego, it was cosmic destiny. He was designing a launch pad for his soul. The pyramid wasn't just architecture, it was theology carved in stone. You wander through the palace corridors in your mind, hearing priests chant hymns to Ra, the sun god. Torches flicker on walls painted with vibrant scenes as the afterlife. Boats sailing across starry skies, jackal-headed Anubis weighing the hearts of the dead. The pharaoh absorbs all this imagery and thinks, "My pyramid will be the bridge between earth and heaven. It will make me immortal." And honestly, standing out here centuries later, you have to admit he nailed it. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient records hint that royal architects used dreams as blueprints. They claimed divine visions revealed the exact proportions and angles needed to please the gods. So picture a priest waking up groggy, hair sticking up in every direction, saying, "Ra told me last night we need a 51-degree slope." Everyone nods solemnly, scribbling it down, while secretly wondering if he just had too much fermented honey the night before. You brush your hand along the palace wall in your imagination, but it melts back into the pyramid's actual stone, reminding you that all of this, the ego, the visions, the grand plans, solidified into the rock you touched tonight, that's the weird magic of history. Ideas become buildings, buildings become ruins, and ruins become myths. And here you are, balancing all three in your head like spinning plates. The royal court hums in your mind's ear. Officials bicker about logistics. Scribes scratch numbers onto papyrus. And priests argue whether the pyramid should be aligned with Orion or Sirius. Historians still argue whether these alignments were intentional or just happy accidents. But you can feel the tension of cosmic mathematics hanging in the smoky air. The pharaoh doesn't care about the technicalities. He simply wants a promise that his soul will be remembered. That when people thousands of years later wander the desert at night, they'll whisper his name, and you're doing exactly that. You tilt your head back and whisper softly into the desert wind. Khufu, the name feels strange on your tongue, like dust and honey at the same time. And though the palace has long crumbled, though the royal courts are silent, his dream still stands in front of you, as undeniable as the moon above. You can almost see him smiling, not kindly, not warmly, but with the smug grin of someone who pulled off the world's greatest flex. He got what he wanted, immortality through stone, and he dragged every worker, priest, and dreamer into his vision, whether they liked it or not. You let the pharaoh's smug smile dissolve into the night sky and find your gaze pulled upward, past the jagged edges of stone, past the moonlight, toward the black canopy shimmering with stars. It's impossible to stand here and not look up. And once you do, it hits you. These pyramids aren't just colossal heaps of limestone. They're like giant laser pointers aimed at eternity. That thought alone nudges you into the rabbit hole of one of the biggest debates in ancient history. Were these things just really fancy tombs? Or were they gigantic star maps carved onto the desert? The mainstream angle is simple. Pyramids are tombs. End of story. They were built to house the bodies and treasures of pharaohs, complete with food, amulets, and furniture. Because apparently the afterlife is BYO furniture. Sarcophagi have been found inside some pyramids, and mortuary temples were attached to them, where priests would perform rituals to keep the king comfy in the afterlife. On paper, it's a neat explanation, but the problem is that the most famous of them all, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, doesn't quite behave like a proper tomb. There are no elaborate decorations on the walls like you'd find in later burial sites, no catalog of spells, no elaborate funerary art, just stark, echoing chambers cut deep into the stone, humming with geometry. It feels less like a tomb and more like a machine. Historians still argue whether the Great Pyramid ever held a mummy at all. The so-called King's Chamber is empty, save for a granite box that looks more like an industrial container than a gilded coffin. Was it robbed? Was the body hidden elsewhere? Or was the whole idea of it being a tomb just a cover story for something more cosmic? The debate doesn't die, it's passed down like a family argument no one can quite settle. You tilt your head back toward Orion's belt. 3 stars in a row, neat and tight. Then you look back at the 3 pyramids of Giza, also lined up neatly. Not quite perfect, but close enough to make you wonder. Coincidence? Maybe. But some scholars argue that the pyramids were deliberately aligned with those stars. Each stone mountain a reflection of the heavens, as if the builders were saying, as above, so below. Suddenly, you're not just looking at architecture, you're looking at astronomy, frozen in stone. A quirky tidbit. Some fringe writers claim the pyramids weren't just aligned to Orion, but that they served as interstellar beacons. The idea goes that the shafts and chambers acted like a kind of radio tower for the soul, shooting Pharaoh's spirits into space like cosmic Wi-Fi. You chuckle softly at the thought. Now streaming live, Pharaoh Khufu, available in all galactic regions? Still, standing out here with the desert wind brushing your face, you can't entirely shake the goosebumps. The precision is unnerving. The Great Pyramid's sides are almost perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, with an error margin so tiny you'd need a high-tech compass to notice. And you're left asking, how did a civilization without telescopes or GPS pull that off? Did they study the night sky for centuries, mapping out the tiniest shifts of the stars? Or did they know something we don't? Historians still argue whether it was meticulous observation or sheer luck. But either way, the result is uncanny. You pace a few steps in the sand, letting the silence wrap around you. Imagine the ancient sky watchers, priests huddled in linen robes, lying flat on their backs, staring upward night after night, memorizing the stars' slow crawl across the horizon. They sketch lines on papyrus, mark positions with sticks, maybe even use water reflections as primitive observatories. And then, with that knowledge, they guide the placement of blocks heavier than elephants, making sure the pyramid doesn't just rise, it points. There's something comforting about that image. Humanity staring up, always hungry to find meaning in the night sky. You do it too. You're out here, neck craned back, seeing constellations people have named and renamed for millennia. The difference is, you're not dragging stone blocks across the desert to prove your theories. And thank goodness, because your chiropractor bill would be outrageous. But the theories keep stacking, just like the stones. Some believe the Great Pyramid is a cosmic clock, encoding mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio long before anyone officially wrote them down. They say its dimensions mirror the Earth itself, as if the builders wanted to leave behind a stone encyclopedia of planetary knowledge. Was that intentional? Or is it just humans seeing patterns because we can't help it? Historians still argue whether these numerical coincidences are evidence of genius or just overactive imaginations. You place your palm against the stone again and imagine it glowing faintly under the stars, humming like a giant tuning fork. If the pyramid is a tomb, it's the weirdest, most over-engineered tomb ever. If it's a star map, then you're standing inside an ancient observatory big enough to humble whole civilizations. And if it's both, well, then maybe the pharaoh's obsession with eternity wasn't just about the afterlife, but about syncing himself with the rhythm of the cosmos itself. That's the eerie beauty here. The line between practical tomb and cosmic machine blurs in the desert wind. You step back, glance at Orion again. then at the pyramid, and feel your chest tighten, as if the two are locked in some secret dialogue. You don't understand the language, but you feel the pull, and maybe that's the point. Maybe the pyramids weren't built to be understood, at least not fully. Maybe they were built to keep you staring, wondering, craning your neck toward the stars, just like their builders once did. The stars slowly dim in your imagination, replaced by the sound of footsteps crunching against stone. You pivot from gazing at the heavens to picturing life on the ground. The dust, the noise, the sweat. You're no longer a lone wanderer in moonlight. Suddenly, you're dropped right into the heart of an ancient workers' village, the one built beside the Giza Plateau. Picture narrow alleys lined with mud brick houses, cooking fires crackling, the smell of flatbread baking mixing with the sharp tang of beer fermenting in clay jars. This isn't some ragtag camp of slaves chained to their misery. It feels more like a bustling company town, and alive with chatter and the faint hum of songs sung to keep rhythm while hauling stone. The mainstream story is straightforward. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of organized labor communities near the pyramids, rows of dormitory-style buildings, bakeries that could churn out thousands of loaves a day, and even breweries that kept workers supplied with beer, a safer, more reliable drink than Nile water. Excavated bones tell their own story. Workers ate meat regularly, a luxury in ancient Egypt, suggesting they weren't starving slaves but valued laborers. You can almost hear the sizzling of goat or cattle fat on makeshift grills, the occasional cheer when extra rations arrived. These men and women weren't expendable. They were essential. You walk down one of the dusty lanes, feeling the grit under your sandals, brushing shoulders with masons, carpenters, and rope makers. They smile at you, their hands rough from work, their backs stiff but their eyes proud. They know they're building something extraordinary, something their grandchildren will point at in awe. It wasn't misery that held them here. It was meaning. And maybe the promise of endless bread and beer didn't hurt either. Still, historians argue whether all workers were free specialists or if some forced labor slipped into the mix. In a civilization where pharaohs held divine authority, saying no thanks to pyramid duty wasn't exactly an option. But the discoveries of worker cemeteries, burials with honor, carefully placed amulets, and proper rites suggest these people weren't treated like disposable slaves. They were part of something bigger, and they knew it. A quirky tidbit. Graffiti found on the stones themselves tells you the crews had names like Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkore. Imagine being in a sweaty desert construction gang and proudly painting Team Boozy Pharaoh on a block destined for eternity. It adds a very human layer, reminding you these builders weren't faceless drones. They had humor, camaraderie, and a sense of identity. Even while pushing rocks the size of SUVs, you follow the path deeper into the village. Kids chase each other through alleys. Old women weave mats. And somewhere, a priest mutters blessings over a pile of bread. At the edge, a small infirmary bustles. Broken bones, crushed toes, strained muscles. These were everyday hazards. But evidence of medical care has been found. Splints, healed fractures, traces of herbal treatments. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a far cry from abandoning the injured to the sand. You sense that in this place, survival wasn't just about brute strength, it was about community. The sun in your imagination climbs higher, and you squint at the glare bouncing off the limestone plateau. The air shimmers with heat, a whistle blows, and workers begin the long march toward the base of the pyramid. They carry ropes, chisels, wooden sledges. Some haul water jars to pour over sand, reducing friction for dragging blocks. The rhythm of chants rises in the background, voices sinking steps, turning labor into something almost ritual. You catch yourself tapping your foot, realizing even grueling work sounds less crushing when it has a beat. And yet, here's where the cover-up whispers creep in. Some fringe researchers argue that this neat, happy narrative of volunteer labor is too sanitized, too convenient for modern sensibilities. They claim the full truth is buried, that armies of workers included prisoners of war, debt slaves, and peasants dragged from their homes. Maybe the archaeologist uncovered the nicer, polished side of the story while the harsher realities were brushed away like dust. Historians still argue whether these villages represent the whole workforce or just a privileged minority. You imagine the dual reality. One side, cheerful gangs of specialists carving their nicknames into stone. The other, faceless conscripts sweating in silence, their lives swallowed by the desert. Maybe both existed. Just as in any empire, pride and oppression tangled together, hard to separate after thousands of years. You step past the edge of the workers' town and look back. Smoke rises gently from the hearths. The sound of laughter drifts on the breeze. Behind it all, the pyramid towers, casting its shadow like a silent overseer. The villagers live and die in its shade, their stories etched into the blocks more deeply than any king's name. And then it strikes you, while pharaohs obsessed over immortality, it's these ordinary builders whose fingerprints you can still see, in tool marks, in graffiti, in bones carefully buried by comrades. They too achieved eternity. In their own way, though no one carved their names in hieroglyphs 10 feet tall. You glance at your own hand in the moonlight and wonder, if you left behind only your fingerprints on stone, would someone thousands of years later pause, trace them, and whisper your existence back into the night? The desert wind carries that thought, scattering it like sand. And you realize you're no longer just thinking about pyramids. You're thinking about humanity and the way we build, not just for survival, but for meaning. You shuffle your feet in the sand, still hearing the ghostly echoes of laughter and hammering from the workers' town. But the question gnaws at you. Were these people truly free specialists, or did whips crack through this desert long before the sun rose? That image of chained slaves, backs bent, sweat dripping into the dust while overseers bark commands, is burned into modern imagination thanks to old movies and biblical epics. But as you stand here, the pyramid looming like a silent witness, you start peeling away that Hollywood gloss to see the messy truth underneath. The mainstream fact first. The majority of archaeologists today agree that the pyramids weren't built by vast armies of slaves. Excavations of the workers' cemeteries near Giza revealed men and women buried with care, given food offerings, and sometimes laid to rest with amulets meant to guide them into the afterlife. That's not how you treat slaves you don't care about. Add to that the evidence of decent rations, bread, beer, meat, and you start to see a picture of specialized labor crews, trained and valued for their skills. These weren't random peasants thrown into chains. They were masons, carpenters, and engineers, the kind of people you'd want on your dream construction team. But historians still argue whether that's the whole truth. Could the official village we've uncovered just represent the elite tier of workers, the foremen, the specialists, the craftsmen, while the bulk of brute labor came from less fortunate souls? Perhaps corvée laborers pressed into service through taxes or tribute. Some scholars suggest entire families were drafted seasonally, their contribution to the pharaoh's project acting as both duty and debt payment. That means, yes, workers were compensated, but it wasn't exactly a choice. Imagine your local government showing up to say, instead of taxes this year, how about you carry a few blocks heavier than your car? And then there's the biblical connection. For centuries, Western imaginations tied the pyramids to the Hebrew story of slavery in Egypt. Cecil B. DeMille had whole movie sets filled with chained extras dragging stones under the desert sun. But here's the quirky tidbit. Historians now point out that the Israelites, if they were in Egypt at all, lived centuries after the pyramids were already ancient. In other words, Moses didn't lead his people out from building Khufu's tomb because by then, Khufu had been dust for over 1,000 years. So next time you rewatch the Ten Commandments, you can smirk knowingly at the historical inaccuracy. while everyone else is focused on Charlton Heston's beard. Still, you can't shake the possibility of exploitation woven into the story. Even if they weren't slaves in the brutal sense, many workers may have had little choice but to serve. A peasant farmer might see his fields flood with the Nile, making agriculture impossible for months. Instead of idle waiting, he's conscripted into pyramid duty. Bread and beer keep him alive. Camaraderie makes the days bearable. But deep down, maybe he's not thrilled about hauling limestone instead of fishing or farming. You picture the scene: long lines of men pulling ropes, chanting in unison to keep the rhythm, sandals slipping in the sand. Overseers stand to the side, not with whips, but with measuring rods and shouted encouragements, making sure the work stays steady. It's not the caricature of misery, but neither is it some utopian worker's paradise. It's somewhere in between, a complex, dusty truth like most things in history. You kneel in your imagination beside a worker's grave, fingers brushing the stone amulet tucked near the skeleton's ribs. A scarab, symbol of rebirth. Whoever buried him wanted his spirit to roll into the afterlife, just like the sacred beetle rolls its ball of dung across the sand. It's a strangely tender gesture, and you can't help but feel respect for a man whose sweat is still visible in the tool marks, etched into the pyramid walls. And yet, off in the distance, another picture nags at you. Prisoners of war, dragged from foreign lands, stripped of choice. Maybe their bones didn't make it into honored cemeteries. Maybe their graves were shallow, forgotten, erased by time. Archaeologists haven't found much evidence for it. But absence doesn't always equal proof. Historians still argue whether the stories of mass slavery tied to the pyramids are myths, or just history's dust carefully swept away. You rise again, brushing the imaginary sand from your knees. The debate circles like vultures over the desert. Slaves or specialists? Oppression or pride? The truth is messy enough to contain pieces of both. You smirk at the thought. Human history rarely fits neatly into black and white categories, no matter how badly our movies want it to. As the desert breeze tickles your skin, you realize something else. Whether slave, servant, or skilled craftsman, the builders left behind the same monument. Their collective effort fused into a structure so monumental that we're still talking about it thousands of years later. The pharaoh might have dreamed it, but the workers made it real. And maybe, just maybe, their immortality lies in every tourist's gasp, every whispered bedtime story, every wide-eyed wanderer like you pressing a hand to cool limestone under the moon. You step back, crane your neck again, and imagine all those anonymous faces etched into the pyramid itself. Invisible but present, watching through the stone. Slave or specialist, proud or bitter, every one of them shares a piece of this impossible legacy. And you realize you'll never walk past these pyramids the same way again. You drag your gaze from the faces of phantom workers back to the very blocks themselves, towering and silent, each one a puzzle you can touch. You crouch low, running your hand along the edges, and you can feel the crispness of the cuts, the stubborn refusal of the stone to erode completely, even after thousands of years of desert winds gnawing at it. This is where the conversation turns from who built the pyramids to how they shaped the raw material of mountains into geometric perfection. The mainstream story tells you the Egyptians quarried limestone locally, especially from the Giza Plateau itself, while tougher granite blocks, some weighing up to 70 tons, came from Aswan, hundreds of miles upriver. Imagine standing in that quarry, copper chisels in hand, hearing the steady thunk-thunk of metal against stone. Workers chipped at fault lines, wedged in wooden poles, then soaked them with water so the swelling wood cracked the rock. You almost wince at the patience required. No bulldozers, no jackhammers, just endless hammering, prying, and sweating under the sun until the stone finally surrendered. Historians still argue whether copper chisels could really do the trick against granite that's stubborn. Some say they wore down too quickly, forcing workers to replace tools constantly, Others suggest dolerite pounders, harder rocks used like giant hammers to break away surfaces. And still others wonder whether we're underestimating Egyptian ingenuity altogether. That maybe they used methods we haven't even rediscovered yet. The quarry remains themselves show battered dolerite balls, as if someone went at the granite with the world's largest pestle and mortar set. You can almost picture the exhaustion in their arms. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some fringe researchers claim that sonic tools, yes, like some ancient subwoofer-powered chisels, were used to cut the blocks. They imagine high-frequency vibrations breaking molecular bonds, leaving smooth edges as if the stone were butter. You can laugh at the idea of an ancient Egyptian DJ dropping the sickest beat to split granite. But it's hard not to marvel at the sheer precision of cuts you see even today. You step closer to one block, noting how the faces line up so tightly you can barely slip a credit card between them. No mortar. No glue, just geometry and muscle memory. Even more eerie is the consistency. Block after block, side after side, as if the builders had some invisible ruler stretching across centuries. That kind of uniformity is hard enough to achieve with laser-guided saws, let alone with copper chisels dulled by every stroke. Historians still argue whether the smooth casing stones, those polished white surfaces that once made the pyramids shine, were finished by endless hand polishing, or by some method we no longer understand. You imagine yourself in one of those quarries. The sun beats down, and the air smells of sweat and wet wood. Echoes of pounding stones bounce through the cliffs. Workers grunt as wedges crack a block free, and cheers rise when the slab finally tumbles loose. But then the real work begins, shaping it. They lay out chalk lines, chip carefully along edges, smooth roughness with a sandstone rubbers. Each block must not only fit its neighbor, but lock with it, because when you're stacking millions of stones, even a tiny misalignment could throw off the entire structure. You smirk at the thought? Next time you struggle to assemble IKEA furniture? Remember, these people fit multi-ton stones together so neatly they've outlasted entire civilizations. And no, they didn't have an Allen wrench. The granite blocks, the ones dragged from Aswan, add another layer of awe. The king's chamber alone contains slabs so massive that even modern cranes would groan under their weight. How did they cut, transport, and set those with Bronze Age technology? You picture gangs of men hammering endlessly, sparks flying off copper tools, chunks of stone spraying, until finally, a clean block emerges. Did they cheer, or did they groan, realizing they had thousands more to go? And yet, the stone tells its own story. Tool marks still exist. Little grooves where chisels slipped. Divots from pounding dolerite. Scars that whisper, yes, human hands did this. The precision doesn't erase the humanity, it highlights it. Every line, every edge, is a conversation between raw geology and raw determination. You run your palm along one of those ancient scars, and suddenly the block feels less like a mystery and more like a diary. A worker's swing is still there. Frozen in stone, you imagine him wiping sweat from his forehead, cursing the stubborn rock, maybe even cracking a joke to the man beside him. And here you are, centuries later, tracing his frustration like a fingerprint, but then your eyes drift upward to the seamless lines, and the awe returns. Could sheer persistence really achieve this? Or was there some lost knowledge, maybe not lasers or sonic hammers, but clever techniques forgotten in the sands of time? Historians still argue whether we're underestimating ancient engineering or over-romanticizing it. Maybe both. You lean back, taking in the whole pyramid again. From afar, it's a giant triangle, but up close it's millions of stories, each one carved into stone, each one shouting the same thing. We made this, and whether by copper chisels, pounding dolerite, or some forgotten trick, the result is the same. You're standing in front of a riddle carved so deeply into history that even erosion hasn't worn it smooth. You squint against the sunlight as your thoughts drift from chiseling and quarry dust to the real headache. How in the name of Ra did anyone actually move these massive stones once they were freed from the earth? Cutting them was hard enough, but transporting blocks that weigh as much as several cars stacked together, that's the part that keeps even the most serious scholars awake at night. The mainstream answer sketches a picture of sledges dragged over sand, greased by water to reduce friction. Imagine a huge wooden sled with a stone slab lashed tight, ropes coiled thick as pythons pulled by dozens of men. Someone stands at the front, pouring water over the sand, creating a thin layer that keeps grains from piling into ridges. Suddenly the sled glides more smoothly, and physics quietly tips its hat. This isn't just theory. An ancient tomb painting actually shows workers hauling a statue in exactly this way, with a man at the front pouring liquid on the sand. So yes, the Egyptians may have cracked the trick long before engineering professors got around to it. But historians still argue whether that could work at scale. Dragging one block is one thing, but millions of blocks? Some suggest there had to be temporary causeways or massive ramps stretching from quarries to the building site. Entire highways of packed mud and wood just to ferry the cargo. Others whisper about canals, that the Nile itself was rerouted seasonally, letting barges float the stones closer to Giza before workers muscled them ashore. You tilt your head, imagining the landscape alive with construction, water channels dug by hand, boats creaking under impossible weights, songs echoing as workers rode. Then come the quirky claims, the kinds of theories that make late-night documentaries irresistible. One fringe idea suggests anti-gravity devices, little crystal-powered contraptions that made stones weightless. Picture an ancient foreman muttering, "Just flip the levitation switch." Horemheb, while his crew guides a floating block like a giant balloon. Or better yet, aliens themselves descend with tractor beams, casually stacking pyramids like Lego towers while humans watch slack-jawed. The image makes you laugh softly, but you can't deny how deeply it's woven into pop culture. Still, you try to focus on what can be touched and tested. Imagine being one of those workers gripping a rope, skin blistering, sand grinding into your heels as you lean backward with all your weight. The air smells of sweat and wet sand. Your ears ring with the groans of wood, the cries of encouragement. You tug, slip, then tug again. Every inch the block moves is a victory, and yet the overseer shouts, "Only 20 more miles. Boys, you'd probably drop the rope and fake an injury right there." One experiment in modern times showed that with enough people, ropes, and clever lubrication, a multi-ton block can indeed be hauled across sand. It doesn't look glamorous. It doesn't look easy, but it looks possible. Which means the cover-up, if there is one, may not be about whether humans built the pyramids, but about how much blood, sweat, and ingenuity they actually spent in the process. Another quirky fringe angle. Some researchers claim the blocks weren't moved at all. They were cast in place from a kind of early concrete. Pourable limestone slurry hardened into blocks directly on the pyramid. If that were true, most of the transport problem vanishes, though the evidence remains hotly contested. You run your fingers over a block again, wondering, is this carved from a quarry or baked like a cake? Historians still argue whether microscopic analysis supports the cast stone theory or debunks it entirely. But your imagination prefers the grit of rope and sand. You picture long caravans moving across desert, each block like a stubborn mule. Workers chant in rhythm, maybe accompanied by drum beats or claps, timing their pull so the sled jerks forward together. Dust rises, throats burn, and progress is measured in feet, not miles. At night, campfires flicker, beer and bread passed around, laughter mixing with groans as muscles ache. Tomorrow they'll do it all again. And just when you start to pity them, you smirk at the thought. Next time you complain about dragging groceries up 3 flights of stairs, remember these people drag 70-ton slabs across deserts, Perspective, my friend. Still, the mystery lingers. How exactly did they handle the logistics of millions of stones? Where were all those ramps, canals, and scaffolds? Some evidence remains, but not enough. It's as if time itself conspired to hide the most mundane, backbreaking details, and so the debate stretches on between sweat-soaked human effort and the tantalizing idea of some forgotten technique. You take a deep breath, looking out over the desert where imaginary sledges creak and ropes snap, and you realize the story of moving the stones is as monumental as the stones themselves. Whether dragged, floated, or, hey, levitated by a friendly alien intern, the feat stands as one of history's most stubborn riddles. Your gaze lifts from the dusty caravans of sledges and barges to the pyramid itself, towering like a frozen mountain of human ambition. If getting the stones to Giza was one impossible task, then stacking them into a shape so precise it still dazzles engineers. Today was the next impossible step, and this is where theories split faster than a cracked limestone block. Ramps, spirals, levers, hidden scaffolding. Each idea trying to explain how mere mortals turned millions of stones into a geometry lesson that pierces the sky. The mainstream proposal, the one most textbooks stick with, involves gigantic straight ramps, massive inclines of mud brick and rubble, stretching for miles, gradually sloping upwards so sledges could be dragged block by block to the level under construction. You close your eyes and picture it. A giant dirt tongue licking up the side of the pyramid, constantly extended and raised as the structure itself climbed higher. Thousands of workers not only hauling stones for the pyramid, but hauling stones for the ramp itself. By the time the Great Pyramid was halfway finished, the ramp alone might have required more material than the pyramid itself. It's practical in theory, but laughably absurd in execution. Historians still argue whether ramps that large could have ever been built, maintained, or dismantled without leaving obvious scars. Where are the remains of these colossal dirt highways? Did they simply vanish into the desert? Or were they cannibalized for later building projects? Evidence is slim, and that emptiness fuels the hunger for alternative explanations. One such alternative is the spiral ramp theory. Imagine a long corkscrew of packed earth wrapping around the pyramid, hidden from casual view, allowing stones to be dragged upward in circles until they reach the top. The idea solves the too big problem of the straight ramp, but creates a new one. How do you keep the spiral sturdy as the pyramid grows taller? Wouldn't workers constantly trip, tumble, and curse their way down as sand gave way beneath their feet? You grin at the mental image. Ancient OSHA reports would have been a nightmare. Then there's the internal ramp hypothesis, a more modern twist. Picture tunnels spiraling inside the pyramid itself, like hidden veins carved into its body, where stones were dragged upward from within. Some researchers believe faint notches and anomalies detected by scans hint at exactly such a design. If true, it would mean the Great Pyramid is not just a solid mountain of blocks, but also a labyrinth of hidden corridors, a construction site frozen inside the stone. And of course, fringe theories refuse to be left out of the party. You hear whispers about advanced lifting devices, massive counterweights sliding in shafts, water-powered elevators, or even mysterious energy harnessed from the earth itself. My favorite mental cartoon: ancient Egyptians casually walking stones up staircases made of light beams, while someone in the background says, "Don't tell the archaeologist, it ruins the mystery." You take a step closer, squinting at the slope of the pyramid, and try to imagine any of these ramps existing in reality. Dust clouds rising as sledges grind upward, the smell of crushed limestone underfoot, ropes groaning, voices shouting encouragement or curses. Thousands of footprints trample the ramps daily, the air thick with grit and sweat. At night, torches line the path, flickering in the dark as workers labor under the stars. the pyramid becomes not just a tomb, but a living city. A construction hive buzzing 24 hours a day. And here's a quirky tidbit you can't ignore. Some ancient stories suggest levitation through sound. Priests chanting at specific frequencies supposedly made stones lighter, humming them into place with divine resonance. Imagine a choir so powerful it doubled as a crane. You chuckle at the thought. Karaoke night in ancient Egypt could have been dangerous. Hit the wrong note and suddenly your neighbor's house floats away. Yet as wild as it sounds, the fact remains. The final result exists somehow, some way. Block after block rose higher and higher until they formed the sharp, clean lines we still see today. Whether by ramps, spirals, or secret chance, the pyramid climbed skyward, dragging human imagination with it. Historians still argue whether we've underestimated the simplicity of brute force or overlooked the brilliance of an elegant, now lost technique. Maybe the Egyptians didn't need magic, aliens, or science fiction. They had organization, math, and the will to exhaust themselves for a vision of eternity. You can almost hear the foreman shrugging. Yeah, it's insane, but we're Egyptians. That's what we do. You lean back, picturing the pyramid mid-construction, half-dressed in ramps, spirals, and sweat, looking less like a timeless monument and more like a messy construction site. And somehow, that makes it more human. The pyramid wasn't born perfect, it clawed its way upward, block by block, mistake by mistake, until it became the clean silhouette that still haunts the desert sky. Your eyes linger on the jagged ramps you just imagined, dust swirling around the unfinished pyramid, but slowly they drift upward, toward the night sky that those same workers must have stared at after long days of hauling stone. You tilt your neck back, and suddenly you're not just looking at limestone geometry anymore. You're staring into constellations, where the stars seem to wink back with secrets of their own. Because here's the thing, the pyramids aren't just giant piles of stone. They are also aligned with shocking precision to the cosmos, almost as if someone wanted to stitch heaven and earth together. The mainstream fact hits first. The Great Pyramid is oriented to the cardinal points with a precision that would humble even modern surveyors. North, south, east, west, its sides line up so closely that compasses nod in approval. How, without compasses or satellites, did the builders manage this? Historians still argue whether they used the circumpolar stars, watching where they rotated night after night, or whether they relied on the shadow of the sun at equinox. Either way, it meant long, patient observation, meticulous notes, and an obsession with accuracy that feels almost obsessive-compulsive. But accuracy alone isn't the only cosmic clue. You tilt your gaze to Orion's belt, those 3 bright stars strung like a jeweled belt across the night. Now tilt it back down toward the Giza Plateau. The 3 pyramids line up in a strikingly similar pattern. The Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure echo the positions of Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. Not only that, but the Nile itself roughly mirrors the Milky Way. Suddenly, the entire landscape feels like a cosmic diagram, a mirror of the heavens pressed into the sand. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's the kind of coincidence that keeps fringe theorists scribbling until sunrise. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some alternative researchers insist the pyramids weren't tombs at all, but giant star maps meant to anchor Egypt to celestial forces. They argue that shafts leading out from the king's chamber point directly toward Orion and Sirius, channels through which the pharaoh's soul could rocket into eternity. Imagine lying in that dark chamber, a thin shaft of starlight cutting through the gloom, like the universe sending you a final invitation. Come on up! And suddenly the pyramid feels less like a grave, and more like a launch pad. Of course, historians still argue whether those alignments were deliberate or just happy accidents. Did the builders really intend to copy Orion's belt? Or are modern sky watchers guilty of overinterpreting? After all, stars shift slightly over millennia due to precession, so what we see now isn't exactly what the Egyptians saw. The debate leaves you dangling in the middle, torn between wonder and skepticism. You close your eyes and imagine an ancient priest standing with the simple sighting tool, maybe a plumb line dangling from a stick, lining up stones not by trial and error but by patient watching. Night after night, he charts the slow crawl of Orion across the sky. He whispers calculations, scratches marks in the sand, tells workers exactly where to place the next cornerstone. This wasn't just construction, it was choreography with the stars. And then your mind wanders to myths. The god Osiris, often associated with Orion, lord of the afterlife, waiting among the constellations. To Egyptians, death wasn't an end but a journey to join the gods. The pyramid, aligned with Orion, could be the literal bridge to immortality. You picture the pharaoh lying in his chamber, embalmed and wrapped, his soul slipping free, darting up through the star shaft, greeted by Osiris himself. Welcome home, the constellation whispers. Still, the skeptic in you smirks. Was it really divine intention? Or just human pattern seeking? Humans see faces in clouds, animals in stars. Why not belts and pyramid? And yet, the sheer precision of the alignments, the obsession with north, the whispers of cosmic geometry, well, it's enough to keep you awake a little longer. One more quirky note to tuck under your blanket. Some believe the pyramid encodes mathematical constants. Pi, the golden ratio. Even measurements of Earth itself, ratios of base to height, angles of slope, all seem to whisper numbers that wouldn't be discovered until thousands of years later. Historians still argue whether that's intentional design or modern cherry-picking, but if intentional, it suggests the builders weren't just stone haulers, they were mathematicians writing an equation in rock. One so big you can only read it from the sky. You exhale slowly, letting your gaze drift between sand and stars. And the whole pyramid feels different now. Not just a tomb, not just a monument, but a frozen alignment of earth and heaven. You can almost hear a quiet voice, carried by desert wind and starlight, saying, "As above, so below." Your neck still aches from staring at Orion's belt when your curiosity drifts back down into the stone. You've been gazing outward, into the stars, but now you lean closer to the pyramid's body itself, pressing your cheek to cool limestone and wondering what lies hidden inside. Because here's the truth. The Great Pyramid isn't just a mountain of blocks. It's riddled with narrow shafts, half-finished corridors, and chambers that feel more like riddles than rooms. The inside is as mysterious as the outside, maybe even more so. The mainstream blueprint is simple enough on paper. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and those curious shafts leading outward. But when you crawl through the actual corridors, hunched over, scraping your back on stone polished smooth by centuries of explorers, you realize this isn't a tidy floor plan. It feels like a labyrinth designed not just for the dead pharaoh, but for your imagination. Historians still argue whether the narrow shafts were ventilation ducts, symbolic pathways for the soul, or simply mistakes from abandoned construction attempts. One points straight toward Orion, another toward Sirius, cosmic bullseyes, or convenient coincidences. The debate leaves you trapped in the passage, trying to decide whether you're in an air vent or a star tunnel. You shuffle into the so-called Queen's Chamber, though no queen was ever buried there. The air is still heavy with dust, smelling faintly of limestone and silence. The room is plain, unadorned, not what you'd expect for royalty, and yet, in its walls are tiny shafts, so small that no human could crawl through. When robotic probes were sent inside, they found doors with mysterious copper handles, hidden deep in the stone, leading to nowhere. Or maybe to somewhere we've never opened. You can't help but shiver, thinking of hidden doors sealed for thousands of years, waiting for the right moment or the wrong person. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the 1990s, a robot camera sent into one of those shafts captured what looked like a little stone door with copper fittings. Later explorations found yet another door behind it, like Russian nesting dolls. The pyramid keeps teasing, "Oh, you thought you reached the end. Cute. Try again." Historians still argue whether these are real chambers sealed with purpose or just construction oddities. But the effect is the same. You're left with the delicious frustration of a mystery that refuses to end. And then there's the grand gallery. You crawl up into it and suddenly the space explodes upward. A tall, narrow hall that stretches above your head like a cathedral frozen in stone. The walls slope inward, tier upon tier, until they nearly kiss at the top. The acoustics are strange. Every whisper bounces. Every footstep echoes like thunder. Some say this was purely structural, a way to relieve pressure on the king's chamber. Others suspect it had ritual purpose. That sound itself played a role, resonating in ways we still don't fully grasp. You hum softly, and the vibration seems to linger too long, as if the stone itself is humming back. Of course, fringe thinkers leap on this. Some claim the pyramid wasn't a tomb at all, but a machine, a gigantic energy device that harnessed sound, water, or even earth vibrations. In this view, the shafts weren't for air, but for resonance. The chambers not for burial, but for amplification. The Great Pyramid is an ancient power plant, humming with energy to light or heal or who knows. You smirk, imagining a pharaoh flipping a giant on switch while priests cheer. But part of you wonders, why does it all feel so deliberate, so carefully tuned? You crawl finally into the king's chamber, the heart of the puzzle. Inside sits the massive granite sarcophagus, lidless, empty, its red stone cold and rough under your hand. No mummy was ever found here. No inscriptions cover the walls. Just silence and geometry. Historians still argue whether the pharaoh's body was stolen, never placed here, or whether the chamber's true purpose was never burial at all. You sit in the quiet and the darkness, and for a moment, you feel like you're in the center of the earth, or the center of something bigger. You take a slow breath, the air stale but heavy with the scent of ancient dust. You imagine workers sealing the last stone, priests chanting, torches sputtering, and then silence descending forever. Yet here you are, thousands of years later, your phone light cutting across the chamber, your heartbeat echoing louder than any ghost. It's almost funny. You came looking for answers. Who built the pyramids? How? Why? But the deeper you crawl inside, the more questions pile up. Every shaft feels like a whisper, every sealed door like a wink. The pyramid isn't giving up its secrets easily. It's teasing you the way only a 500-year-old prankster can, and you realize that maybe that's the point. To keep you wondering, even as you drift toward sleep. You step out of the claustrophobic corridors, blinking against the desert sunlight, and suddenly the Great Pyramid doesn't feel quite so alone anymore. Your mind skips across the globe, because Egypt isn't the only place where stone giants rise. Across oceans and continents, you find cousins. Pyramids built by people who supposedly never met each other. Structures echoing the same triangular obsession. And that raises the obvious question, why does this shape keep popping up like a global meme carved into stone? The mainstream explanation is almost soothing. Pyramids are stable, stack heavy stones high, and a broad base tapering to a narrow top is the most practical way to keep them standing. You try to balance blocks into a tower in any other shape, and gravity laughs at you. The pyramid is simply nature's answer key. That's why the Egyptians built them, why the Nubians built them in Sudan, why the Chinese raised them near Xi'an, and why the Maya and Aztecs crowned their cities with step pyramids. Universally practical, universally durable. But you know that answer doesn't erase the goosebumps, Because these aren't just practical structures, they're sacred ones, tied to heavens, gods, and afterlives. Historians still argue whether the similarities between these cultures are coincidence or evidence of a deeper, older connection, independent invention, or traces of a forgotten global knowledge. You wander mentally to Mexico, standing at the foot of the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan. Its base is nearly the same size as the Great Pyramids, though its top is flat, once crowned with temples. You climb its steep steps, heart-pounding, sun-glaring, and when you reach the summit, you feel the same eerie pull as at Giza. A sense that this isn't just architecture, it's a dialogue with the universe. The avenue below, Street of the Dead, lines up with celestial events, just as the pyramids of Giza do. Coincidence? Again, or obsession with cosmic order written in stone across continents? Your mental journey keeps going, all the way to China, where grassy mounds hide the massive tombs of ancient emperors. The largest, the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, is essentially a pyramid under earth, rumored to contain rivers of mercury and ceilings studded with gems like stars. You picture it, glittering in the dark, waiting beneath layers of soil. The Chinese pyramids are less famous than Egypt's, but the geometry speaks the same language. Broad, stable bases, sides rising to the sky, eternal monuments tying rulers to cosmic order. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some explorers have noted pyramids even in places like Bosnia and Indonesia. The so-called Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun has sparked furious debates. Natural hill or man-made monument? Historians still argue whether it's archaeology or wishful thinking, but you can't help but grin at the idea of pyramid fever. Once you see one, you start spotting them everywhere, like triangles haunting the landscape. Back in South America, the Maya built pyramids at Chichen Itza, where shadows during the equinox slither down the steps in the shape of a serpent. The crowd gasps. The feathered god Kukulkan seems to descend, and you realize the pyramid isn't just a structure. It's a clock, a theater, and a sermon all at once. You chuckle softly, thinking how no modern architect would get approval for giant snake shadow as a design feature. But here it is, still working flawlessly centuries later. So, what does it mean? Did humans everywhere stumble on the same practical shape and then layer it with cosmic meaning? Or did whispers of knowledge travel further than historians admit, long before Columbus or Marco Polo, carried by seafarers, merchants, or legends? The cover-up might not be alien at all. It might be that ancient civilizations were far more connected than we're comfortable admitting. You glance again at Giza, then at the mental map in your head. Egypt, Mexico, China, Peru, Sudan, all dotted with triangles pointing skyward. The world suddenly feels smaller, as if pyramids are postcards from the past saying, "We were here, we knew the same secrets you've forgotten." The skeptic in you rolls its eyes. Of course, pyramids show up everywhere. They're just easy to build and hard to knock down. But the dreamer in you whispers, maybe the ancients weren't just stacking rocks. Maybe they were all tuning into the same cosmic frequency, their monuments vibrating in harmony across oceans of time. You lean into that thought, letting it wrap around you like a blanket. Pyramids aren't just local wonders, they're global lullabies, humming the same tune from continent to continent. And as the desert night deepens, you find yourself smiling at the idea that somewhere, someone on the other side of the world was once staring at their pyramid, wondering the exact same thing you are now. You let the vision of global pyramids fade, but your mind doesn't wander far. It slides back into the corridors of power behind the Egyptian project, because while workers sweated, bled, and strained, someone else was doing a quieter kind of labor. Calculation, record-keeping, ritual. The priests and scribes, perched in their shaded sanctuaries, clutching reed pens and papyrus scrolls, were the true keepers of order. Without them, All the sweat in the world would just have piled stones into shapeless heaps. Mainstream history tells you that Egyptian priests were not only religious leaders, but also scientists, mathematicians, and astronomers rolled into one. They measured the Nile floods, tracked the stars, and advised the pharaoh on when to sow, when to reap, and most importantly, when to build. Their calendars weren't casual. They were precise, guiding everything from temple rituals to massive state projects. You picture one of them, bent over a scroll, muttering numbers under his breath while the foreman outside waits for instructions on where to place the next cornerstone. Historians still argue whether these scribes and priests truly understood the deeper mathematics encoded in the pyramids. Ratios that resemble pi or the golden mean, or whether modern minds are retrofitting those numbers. Did they deliberately encode advanced geometry? Or did the numbers simply fall out of practical necessity? The debate is as endless as the desert horizon. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. Some fringe writers claim the priests were custodians of secret blueprints handed down from a lost civilization. They imagined scrolls hidden in temple vaults, guarded like cosmic passwords, describing construction techniques, cosmic alignments, even the supposed purpose of the pyramids as energy devices. In this vision, the pyramid wasn't designed by trial and error. It was executed according to a sacred instruction manual. You chuckle, imagining a dusty papyrus titled Pyramids for Dummies tucked under a priest's arm. Still, the everyday role of scribes was no joke. They calculated rations for workers, tracked supplies of bread and beer, and kept meticulous records of how many blocks were moved each day. You picture one frustrated scribe at his desk, tallying numbers with the same sigh you use when balancing a checkbook, except his accounting involved thousands of tons of limestone instead of grocery receipts. He scratches his reed pen harder into the papyrus, maybe mutters something about quitting to open a fishing boat, but keeps writing, because without those records, chaos would swallow the project whole. Priests, meanwhile, layered the geometry with ritual. Every cornerstone was laid with ceremony, chants rising into the dusty air. They aligned not just blocks but symbols, ensuring that the structure hummed with divine order. To them, geometry wasn't abstract math, it was magic, a way to channel Maat, the cosmic balance. You imagine the smell of incense wafting over half-finished stone ramps, priests sprinkling holy water while workers wipe sweat from their brows, sacred and profane braided together in every block. And it wasn't only about numbers. The priests controlled access to knowledge. Writing was a privilege, guarded carefully. Most workers hauling stone probably couldn't read a single hieroglyph, but the scribes could. That imbalance of literacy turned information into power, and power into permanence. A scribal error might mean a shipment of stone gets delayed. A scribal flourish might enshrine a pharaoh's name for eternity. You smirk, proof that even in the ancient world, paperwork decided everything. Fringe theories take this further, painting the priests as gatekeepers of esoteric wisdom. Some claim they encoded star maps, prophecy, or even mathematical knowledge of the Earth dimensions into the pyramid's design. The slope angles, the base perimeter, the orientation, all supposedly whispering secrets about the planet itself. Did the priests really intend to build a monument that doubled as a giant encyclopedia? Or are we, centuries later, just reading too much into their choices? Historians still argue whether that's brilliant foresight or modern overinterpretation. You picture the scene again. Rows of scribes scratching with styluses, stacks of papyrus curling in the dry heat, priests chanting under painted ceilings, and outside, gangs of workers tugging sledges under the merciless sun. Everyone had a role. Everyone contributed. But the priests and scribes ensured the chaos of manpower translated into the precision of architecture. They were the invisible architects, the guardians of geometry, the ones who whispered, "Yes, here, place the stone here." You lean back against the pyramid, squinting at its silent angles, And suddenly you see it not just as brute force, but as choreography. Millions of human steps guided by ink, chant, and calculation. Without the priest's rituals and the scribe's numbers, the whole dream might have collapsed into rubble. Instead, it rose stone by stone, like a prayer you can still touch. You lean into the pyramid's shadow, letting the hot air tremble around you, and your thoughts drift past the Nile toward the endless desert horizon. Because what's a pyramid without the landscape it rises from? Sand, stone, river, and sky. The setting isn't just background, it's half the story. And yet, when you picture that scene, you realize how little of it makes sense without clever logistics. Moving millions of stones across miles of desert isn't just about strength, it's about supply lines, tools, animals, and the simple but heroic grind of hauling. The mainstream fact is this: Egyptian engineers didn't have wheels, pulleys, or iron cranes. What they had were sledges, wooden runners dragged across sand or mud. And here's where cleverness sneaks in. Scientists discovered painted tomb reliefs showing workers pouring water ahead of the sledges, wetting the sand to reduce friction. That tiny trick could heavy the effort needed to drag a multi-ton block. You grin at the thought of some ancient supervisor yelling, "More water, less whining," while his crew splashes buckets in the sun. Historians still argue whether animals like oxen or donkeys were used in large numbers. The evidence is thin, and some scholars think most of the brute force came from human hands alone, which makes you wonder, were the Egyptians showcasing human willpower as much as divine ambition? Did dragging stones without beasts of burden turn the act into a ritual of devotion? Here's your quirky tidbit. Some fringe researchers suggest the Egyptians used kites. Yes, kites, giant ones, catching desert winds to help lift or drag blocks. The idea sounds like a child's afternoon project gone wild. But experiments have shown it might just work. You picture workers straining at ropes while above them a massive sail tugs against the sky, like the pyramid itself is already trying to pull its stones heavenward. It's half absurd, half genius. Still, most evidence points to longy, winding ramps of mud brick and rubble. Workers trudged up and down those ramps like ants on an anthill, dragging stones higher with each loop. The ramps were then dismantled, leaving no trace but the geometry we see today. You can almost hear the shuffle of thousands of feet, the grunts and groans, the rhythm of work songs timed to each heave. The desert itself must have echoed with the beat of labor. And yet, the desert was also the greatest enemy. The heat blistered, the sand swallowed tools, and the Nile flood's complicated supply. So the Egyptians worked with the landscape, using the river as a conveyor belt. Boats floated limestone from Tura quarries to the construction site. The Nile wasn't just a backdrop, it was a living artery. Pulsing with stone, you picture barges stacked with gleaming white blocks, gliding past papyrus reeds and crocodiles sunning themselves on the banks. One wrong turn, and boom, there goes a week's worth of hauling. The genius wasn't only in moving stone, but in coordinating thousands of moving bodies. Imagine a dusty foreman waving his arm, workers tugging ropes in unison, and singers pounding drums to set the pace. Without rhythm, without order, chaos would eat the project alive. And here's the thing. You still feel that rhythm today when you stand near the pyramid and let the desert wind whistle through its angles. Now, some alternative theories refuse to let this be about ramps and sweat alone. They whisper about anti-gravity devices, levitation chants, or sound technology that made stone float like feathers. Fringe, absolutely. But you can't deny it scratches at a human itch. We love to believe that someone, somewhere, cracked a shortcut, because otherwise, the truth is sobering. It was just people. People with aching backs, blistered hands, and endless patience. So you picture it all together. Boats sliding along the Nile, ramps snaking up dusty slopes, sledges gliding over wetted sand, maybe even a kite or two tugging optimistically at the desert sky. The logistics were brutal, but they worked, and out of that sweat and ingenuity rose something that still defies comprehension. You chuckle softly. Next time you complain about carrying groceries up a flight of stairs, remember, your ancestors might have hauled a 7-ton limestone block uphill in sandals. Without air conditioning, without iced coffee, just determination and the occasional bucket of water splashed on the ground, and somehow, they made it beautiful. The desert hush stretches wide, but your mind now turns inward, toward the hidden hollows inside the Great Pyramid itself. If the outside is astonishing, the inside is downright puzzling, a maze of shafts, chambers, and passageways that seem designed to tease human curiosity. You duck mentally into those dark corridors, torchlight flickering, the air stale and tight, stone pressing close around you, and you can't shake the question, were these really tombs or something stranger? Mainstream history stands its ground here. The pyramids were tombs, built to safeguard the pharaoh's body and his soul's ascent into the afterlife. The king's chamber with its granite sarcophagus, the queen's chamber lower down, the grand gallery stretching like a cathedral hallway, each element supposedly tied to funerary ritual. And yet, you notice something odd. No mummy has ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. Not a scrap of body, not a trace of jewelry, not a whisper of golden funerary trappings. Historians still argue whether the pharaoh's remains were stolen in antiquity, or whether the pyramid was never meant as a tomb in the first place. Some scholars claim it was a cenotaph, a symbolic resting place, with the real burial hidden elsewhere. Others insist the looters were just too thorough, erasing every sign. But the absence nags at you, like an empty stage after the curtain rises. Here's your quirky tidbit. Fringe theorists love to point at the so-called air shafts that run from the chambers to the pyramid's exterior. Too narrow for humans, angled precisely towards certain stars. They look more like cosmic plumbing than ventilation. One theory, they were spiritual escape routes, guiding the pharaoh's soul toward Orion's belt, the celestial hunting ground of Osiris. Another, they were part of an energy system, channels for vibrations humming through the limestone like a giant tuning fork. You grin, imagining the pyramid as the world's oldest subwoofer, pulsing bass lines into the cosmos. And then there's the grand gallery. Its steep, corbelled ceiling soars higher than any passage needs to, lined with niches and mysterious slots. Practical explanation, it housed counterweights used in sealing off the king's chamber. Mystical explanation, it was a resonant chamber, amplifying sound or energy. You can almost hear a low hum in the stone. Like the pyramid itself is breathing. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is another riddle, carved from a single block of granite, too large to fit through the passageways. It must have been placed during construction. Was it a coffin? Or, as some fringe writers argue, a resonant box, designed to vibrate with chants or frequencies. You give a sleepy chuckle, picturing an ancient DJ spinning limestone beats in the chamber, while priests sway to the rhythm. Even the so-called queen's chamber stirs debate. Some insist it was never meant for a queen at all, as instead, it may have been an earlier burial chamber abandoned mid-project, or a symbolic womb of the goddess, a space for rebirth. Others propose it was part of a functional machine. The pyramid not as tomb, but as power plant. Yes, you've heard it. Water, chemicals, resonance, all supposedly combining to generate energy. Skeptical, absolutely. Entertaining, definitely. But the most haunting part might be what we still haven't found. Hidden behind blocks and sealed corridors may lie more chambers, unexplored voids hinted at by modern scans. What secrets still sleep in the stone? A sealed tomb? A library of forgotten scrolls? Or just empty space? Mocking our curiosity, you shuffle along those dark corridors in your mind, torchlight flickering, each step echoing in silence. Every chamber seems to whisper a riddle. Every shaft points to something beyond. And maybe that's the point. The pyramid doesn't hand you answers. It traps you in questions, looping you in the same maze of wonder the builders must have felt. So you step back out into the desert air, blinking, heart still racing, tomb, temple, machine, monument, whatever the truth. The pyramid's inner chambers hold onto their silence like treasure. And that silence, somehow, is louder than any explanation we've ever come up with. The desert night deepens, stars sliding across the sky like polished gems, and you realize this journey has carried you far. From dusty ramps to secret chambers, from sweaty laborers to whispering priests. And yet, the question that started it all still hovers. Heavier than a limestone block, who really built the pyramids? And why does the truth seem wrapped in so many layers of dust, myth, and mystery? Mainstream history holds its banner high. The pyramids were the work of thousands of organized Egyptians, mobilized under their pharaohs, guided by priests and scribes, driven by faith, loyalty, and a system that turned collective effort into stone immortality. It's an inspiring picture. Human ingenuity at its peak, harnessing nothing more exotic than sweat, ramps, and clever math. And honestly, that version alone is enough to make you sit back in awe. But you can't ignore the cracks in that clean narrative. The missing bodies in the supposed tombs. The star alignments too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The global echoes of pyramid shapes sprouting across continents like a shared obsession. Historians still argue whether these are random overlaps, or hints of a deeper, older story, one that might involve forgotten civilizations, lost sciences, or at the very least, a kind of ancient globalization we're reluctant to admit. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some fringe theorists suggest the pyramids are far older than we're told. Built not in 2500 BCE, but thousands of years earlier, by a civilization wiped away by flood or cataclysm. They point to weathering on the Sphinx, water erosion that doesn't match the desert climate, as proof of rains that last fell millennia before pharaohs ruled. If true, the pyramids aren't monuments to Egypt. They're heirlooms from an age before memory. You can almost hear the stone laugh at the idea that we know its age. And so, the cover-up might not be about aliens or energy machines at all. It might be about protecting a comforting timeline. One where civilization begins neatly in Mesopotamia and Egypt, not in some shadowy, forgotten dawn. If pyramids are older, then history is younger than we think. And that's a thought that rattles the tidy shelves of textbooks. You stand at the pyramid's base one last time, letting your hand rest on the cool stone. It's rough, weathered, scarred by centuries, but still humming with the stubborn kind of permanence. Workers are gone, priests are dust, pharaohs are names half remembered, yet the pyramid still rises. And in that endurance, it feels less like a building and more like a living question mark, daring you to answer. But maybe the truth is simpler, and somehow more magical. Maybe the pyramids were built by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. By hands blistered but determined. By minds both practical and poetic. Maybe the biggest cover-up is that there isn't a cover-up. Just a refusal to believe that humans, messy and mortal, could have dreamed this big and pulled it off. And yet, here the stones are stacked against the sky, proving that they could. You tilt your head back, tracing the pyramid's slope until it merges with the night. The stars above wink, the desert air cools, and you feel the hum of history settling into your bones. Whether tomb, temple, or machine, whether built by Egyptians, Atlanteans, or beings we can't name, the pyramid does its job. It makes you wonder, it makes you small, and it makes you reach for something beyond yourself. And maybe that's the real secret. The pyramid isn't trying to tell you who built it. It's trying to remind you that mystery itself is a kind of gift. One that pulls you into the past even as it points you toward the stars. So you let that mystery wrap around you like linen bandages, soft and ancient, Your breath slows, your shoulders sink, and the desert wind whispers through the stones like a lullaby. The pyramid stands, it always has, it always will, and in its shadow, you finally let your eyelids close. A wind down. The story drifts into a softer register now, each word stretching out like a drawn breath. The desert heat cools into a gentle breeze, carrying grains of sand that settle as quietly as sleep itself. The stars above blur into a slow shimmer, their light fading into a haze of calm. You no longer feel the weight of questions or the itch of debates, only the vast stillness that has always surrounded these ancient stones. You picture the pyramid not as a riddle, but as a mountain of calm, each block a heartbeat, each angle a slow exhale. The desert hushes, the night deepens, and the hum of the world eases into silence. Whatever secrets are hidden, they will wait. They've waited for thousands of years, and they will wait for you, too. So let the mystery rest tonight. Just as you will, let your body sink into comfort, your breath even out, your mind loosen from the day. The pyramid fades into shadow, the stars fade into mist, and the story dissolves into quiet, sweet dreams